Hello, everybody. This is Dan Barreto. I'm the president and CEO of FarmQ Global Consulting. We are a company that is in the business of providing consulting, advice, support, coaching to the entire industry. I'm speaking about pharma, medical devices, and combination drug products, among other companies in the network. This morning, I'm accompanied by Mark Sander, who is an expert in IT technology. Hi, Mark. How are you?
Hey, Dan. How are you?
I'm pretty good. So today we're going to talk about IT compliance. But before we do that, Mark, can you give us a little bit of a background of who you are and why you're speaking about this topic today?
Sure, absolutely. Again, I'm Mark Sander. Currently, I'm the managing director of MFS Solutions, which is a consultancy dedicated to IT strategy and advisory, IT operational effectiveness, mergers and acquisitions, and FDA compliance and remediation. And we also do a little dabbling in emerging technology. But on the FDA compliance and remediation front, I've spent 30 years in the pharmaceutical industry, working for big pharmas and small pharmas alike. Started in actually manufacturing, was a plant manager myself, so well steeped in GMPs and what we need to do. Have done a lot of work on automation and have been corporate CIO for several of those companies.
That's fantastic. A great background. So, Mark, this morning you want to talk about IT compliance. And I think that's an important topic, but I don't think that a lot of people do realize the relevance of this topic and the criticality for the implementation of activities associated with cloud-based infrastructure into their activities. So why is IT compliance to begin with? Why is it so important?
So I think there's a misnomer out there in the industry, and I've heard this from many CIOs and many senior quality leaders. They think the compliance aspects of what we've always dealt with in the predicate rule and now data integrity are IT's responsibility, and nothing could be farther from the truth. Especially when you go to the cloud. I've also heard from some of these people that, well, I don't have to worry about that. That's the vendor's responsibility. It's in the cloud. Well, that's not true. You're the license holder. You're the one who's responsible for these activities. But more importantly, how can a vendor tell me how it's fit for your specific use, which is what the regs talk about.
Okay, I think that's important. But before we go there, I think let's start with the basic concept. And that is, you spoke about the predicate rule. I mean, we have been evolving from hard copy documentation to electronic documentation to now information being saved, archived, and managed through a cloud-based infrastructure. So how is this important for the industry to understand that evolution?
Well, I think you have to break it down into bite-sized pieces because there's different aspects. Let's start with just paper. Today, I think the current standard might be, instead of having backups of my paper, I digitize it, I scan it, and I store that somewhere. That comes with certain controls I need on that documentation, both to protect it, people who have access to it, and to make sure it isn't adulterated or changed. The next level might be, and this is much of what we deal with in today's world, it's no longer paper. It's electronically generated. That's where the new regs and data integrity come in, because the expectation is if it's electronic, the source is electronic data, we expect you to protect it and maintain it in the source format. So if I have electronic data, I'm expected to back it up. I'm expected to protect it. I'm expected to have segregation of duties. I'm expected to make sure that it hasn't been changed. That's different from a piece of paper.
Understood, Mark. Let's also talk a little bit about the cloud, because I think people use the term, and a lot of people, probably like myself, they don't understand how the cloud really operates. What's the cloud? You know, you are the expert. Tell us a little bit about what is the cloud?
So in the old days, we used to store everything and run all of our applications in-house. I could take you to a data center. I could show you a physical server. That's not the way much of it works today, and not the way it's going to work at all in the future. The cloud is basically me taking things that I used to run in-house and moving them to a vendor that's not in my control, not in my four walls, not on my premises. That can vary from an application that I buy as a complete service, where the application, the data, and the hardware are all running somewhere else, or that can be some hybrids of those pieces. Quite often in big pharma now, we find they've moved their data centers outside and they're doing something called infrastructure as a service. That basically says, I'm still running my applications, I still own them, but I took my server and my data center and I gave it to somebody else. And I let them run it for me. We also have platform as a service that's come out recently. Everybody's heard of Salesforce.com, Amazon AWS, Microsoft Azure. They all come where I can buy applications that they run for me, or I can store data. I can use them as infrastructure as a service, or they actually have tools unique to them as a platform that I can use to build my own applications.
So, Mark, I think you're touching on such an important point. We delegate to a certain extent certain activities to external suppliers of this type of services. Storage, archiving, data management. Does that mean that FDA, for instance, or EMA or other regulatory authorities will not necessarily expect that you do any sort of oversight, supervision, validation, qualification of the activities that these companies perform?
Absolutely not. The expectation is you're responsible for your data, for your applications, and for your processes. You're the license holder. It's just like if I have a contract manufacturer, I'm still responsible. I might have agreements that the contract manufacturer does certain things for me, but I also have responsibilities to audit them, to check up on them, to review what they do. Putting a software or application or data in the cloud is the same, doesn't change that.
So that sounds extremely important, Mark. And so my question to you is FDA or are the regulators now asking these questions around?
Absolutely. I
Mhm.
have seen audits. I have seen questions from auditors and from the agencies. They expect you to have validated these systems the same as if you ran them in-house. They expect you to have the same controls. So the things that you would have to do that would include full computer systems validation. Now, components of that may have been done by the vendor on your behalf. There's nothing wrong with that. But they also expect you to have audited the vendor and to periodically review that vendor, just like any other vendor we use
Mhm.
for a quality laboratory, for a biologic laboratory, or for a CMO.
Okay, perfect. Now, Mark, let's talk a little bit about something that it's affecting every company that is out there today. And that is the fact that because of the COVID-19, a lot of companies have to work remote. So their access to records is highly dependent on, a lot of these electronic systems and processes. So do you see that a certain advantage to companies that are in the cloud to be able to do their job better versus those companies that are not in the cloud? Or how do you see this?
So it's a double-edged sword. Absolutely, without the cloud, the majority of companies, schools, colleges that quickly went remote and sent their employees home to shelter in place and yet still stay operational could not have been done without the cloud. I don't know there are very many companies left that haven't sent their email to the cloud. And let's talk about the cloud a little. What is it? I'm sure all of you out there have a personal either Gmail account or Outlook account where you run your email. That's an example of cloud. You're buying a service from them. They run an application you use, and your data sits on their hardware. So in moving quickly and remotely, employees needed to both access systems, data, and communications. If you were in the cloud, it was very easy for you to quickly ramp up because you didn't need to do anything. In the old days when I ran everything in-house, now I needed a port for everyone to dial in from the outside. And let's face it, they're expensive. Capacity and bandwidth are expensive. And we would only buy enough for what we thought we needed. The Friday when everybody worked from home. But your plant workers, your factory workers didn't work from home. So we wouldn't have enough capacity for everyone in the company to do that. With cloud, the capacity becomes the vendor's problem. Now, that's a positive, but that's also a negative. How many of us have experienced issues with some of the video conferencing we've been using? There's been issues I've heard on some of SharePoint and Team sites. There certainly have been issues in LinkedIn and email. I've experienced them myself. And that's the vendors not being able to deal with the capacity increase very quickly. And they have their challenges. Hardware is not available from China right now. So how do I put a new server to increase my capacity? But that's the risk. You can't predict that as the customer, and you have no visibility into that until it's too late. And now when you've put everything in the cloud, I don't have the ability to move it.
So it sounds to me that there's benefits and disadvantages to either staying off the cloud or being in the cloud. So every company, in my opinion, based on what you're saying, has to make that assessment and then decide, do we stay out or do we go in?
Well, but it's not a binary decision. It's not I put things in the cloud, I don't. It's what application.
Oh,
I
okay.
would say 5 years ago, I had the decision as CIO at a company whether to move our email to the cloud. And I chose not to because we were doing a lot of due diligence. And at the time, there was no private cloud, especially with the company I was negotiating with. So I didn't have the ability to segregate my data and protect it. Well, when you're doing a lot of multi-million-dollar due diligence deals or potential acquisitions, you don't want that data falling into the wrong hands. Somebody can go to jail if that happens, and certainly cause the company great harm. So I chose not to move to the cloud. Today, I can get what's called private cloud. So I take that Gmail or that Microsoft Outlook.com service, and it's dedicated, the hardware, the applications and control is dedicated just to me. Now I can put those controls and guarantees I needed for it to make sense.
Yeah.
So there's an example of where I would have said no in the beginning, and today I'd say yes.
Okay.
Now in manufacturing and quality, you have to go through each of those decisions. I might want to put my QMS system in the cloud, but I'm not sure I want to put my LIMS system or my factory automation system in the cloud, because how's that going to work when every device has to communicate to somewhere else very quickly, and I don't always have that capability.
Let me ask you a challenging question. With the COVID-19 issue, do you see that maybe companies will rethink the way they look at these activities and maybe go toward cloud-based infrastructure in the future, given the current situation? What do you see, Mark?
That's an interesting question. We already had a great trajectory to move things in the cloud. I've spoken at CIO conferences and roundtables, and a lot of my peers have a why not cloud first mentality. Show me why not cloud. So that was happening already, but I think what you'll see now is a lot of smaller firms and industries that might not have gotten to the cloud so quickly, considering parts of their data migrating to the cloud. I'm thinking law firms, accountants, they generally might have used cloud services before, but if they weren't, they were shut down in this environment. And so I think outside of industry, I think you'll see an uptake. Within pharma, I think it was happening already.
So, Mark, excellent discussion. Let's talk a little bit about compliance, because I think this is a topic that is of interest to the audience. What are the challenges to companies to be in the cloud and at the same time demonstrate compliance? What do companies need to do? What do companies need to be worried about? Where is it that the attention needs to be paid to?
Also very good questions, and something that I'm not sure everyone understands yet. So remember I said in the beginning of the conversation, it is your responsibility as the licensee or the product approved, the company holding the product approval and the patent, or the FDA approval more importantly, to make sure everything that went into making that product and your data is secure. Giving it to a vendor doesn't mean you don't have to do things. So every GXP system that I put in the cloud, the first thing that should start with is a vendor audit. I'll have my internal SDLC, my life cycle of how I manage and control my systems and how I validate them and implement them. For starters, during that audit, I should be able to map my internal requirements to the vendor's SOPs and how they're doing it, and have a one-for-one. Be able to audit them on it, initially and periodically have a review with them or periodic audit with them to show that they're complying with that. That's first. Second, I've talked to many cloud providers who will incorrectly tell you they are FDA approved or they are pre-validated. Nothing could be farther from the truth. You are still responsible for all the functions. The vendor may do some of those functions for you, and there's nothing wrong with that. But remember, we're proving it's fit for our use. If I make an asset management system to do maintenance and calibration, it can be physically used a lot of different ways, a lot of little details, or the internal process of how you do the maintenance and calibration can be different. So how do I know that that application that everyone is using is appropriate? That's computer systems validation. In that particular case, and I did this for a client recently, the particular vendor we used had a terrific package that went through every function possible, tested, documented in that system. We leveraged that, 20 binders worth, heavily leveraged it, but we still had to go in and define an addendum to the user requirements on how we used it. And we had to do some modest testing to prove it worked in our environment, and more importantly, with our process for maintenance and calibration.
Yeah,
It's not a ton of work, but you have to do that. And I would expect any inspector to want to see that.
I agree. Now, to me, one of the things that happen in this cloud-based industry is that there's constant changes. There's innovation happening at a speed that sometimes we don't even understand. You implement, you validate a system, and 3 months from now, the cloud provider has changed a number of things. They have improved, they have updated their software applications, etc. How does the company keep up with all of these changes in order to say that the validation work that was done is still current?
Also a very good question. Maintaining a state of validation is something a lot of companies struggle with. But in this case, I think the first thing you have to do is have a SOP and process internally on how I'll review changes the vendor makes. The next thing you have to do when you go to the cloud and initiate your initial contract with that vendor is understand A, their process, and B, how they'll communicate to you those changes. In general, vendors will either make their changes available, and in some cases you can choose whether you accept the upgrades or not. And in others, you get them whether you want them or not, and they'll tell you 2 months before they become effective. Again, that's also got to do with whether I'm in a common platform that everyone's using or whether I'm private and segregated in how I use their application or their service. If you have that lined up, again, go back to that asset management company who I think did a tremendous job. Every release they have comes with release notes. I get it whether I want it or not, but they've done a risk assessment, they've classified it, and if they needed additional testing against their package, they have performed that and give me that testing. So the policy I would suggest you have in place, or the SOP, is a documented review of those release notes, saying A, that your company and your quality unit agree with them, therefore that becomes part of your package as an addendum, and you've proven you've done your own risk assessment. And B, if it then bumps up against some of your unique requirements or your unique testing, you have to go back and do additional testing. It's not huge. It might be a simple regression test. I wouldn't say retest the whole system. It's just that function, but you have to take action. And again, I would define that up front before I engage with that particular vendor in an SOP with a practice, with what documents I sign every time they come through. So I have a history. Then you have something to show an inspector.
Okay, great. So finally, I'm sure that people who are listening and watching this video, this program, will ask the question, which I think you should answer at this point, which is the last question I want to ask you. What about data integrity? What is the relationship between the preservation of data integrity and the use of these systems? Where is it that you see the gain from a data integrity perspective?
So let's think about data integrity. If I look at the guidance documents from the agency, the most recent one, they're concerned about segregation of duties, audit trails, and that I'm backing up my data in a way that I can get that data back should there be a disaster within the system or a failure. and I want to know who did things, and I want to know that they can't change things. It's pretty simple. Moving to the cloud doesn't mean I don't have to meet those requirements, and again, just go point at somebody else. Just like you would have an appropriate evaluation program for data integrity internally, that SOP that I suggest you have for cloud vendors should include a section, just like it would have on Part 11, to review how the vendor handles things. And the vendor may have and I've run into this even on things I've run internally. We've had Empower, which is something the FDA loves to inspect regularly. And there's been lots of problems over the last decade of falsification and significant data integrity problems. I can have designed and validated the perfect system, but if my business partner at the lab is not using it properly, it doesn't matter. So you really have to look at this as a holistic system, both the business process, the data, and the application. And how do they all impact each other? Those are all things that you would include as part of your CSV package initially. As you bring that system online, it would be reviewed periodically as part of your periodic review. And the parts that the vendor owns would be part of that periodic audit every 2 or 3 years, when you go back and make sure they're meeting their commitments and following their SOPs as you map them to your life cycle.
Seems to me, Mark, that in this discussion, you've basically let us see the tip of the iceberg. This is a
Yes.
while there may be a certain simplicity associated with all of these activities, there's also a lot of complexity. And I always say that complexity comes with the lack of understanding and appreciation of how to run a process like the one that you're describing. So if people wanted to access you for more information, for support, what do they need to do?
Well, I can be reached on LinkedIn. It's Mark Sander. Also, you can reach me through my company email, which is mfs-solutions@outlook.com. And I'd be happy to speak with you.
So, Mark, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to spend this time with you. I think this has been a great discussion, and we're looking forward to maybe doing this again on a similar topic. So I really appreciate your participation.
Oh, thank you, Dan. And I appreciate the opportunity. And it's been great to speak with you again. It's been a while.
Okay, and then to our audience, it'll be till the next time. Okay, take care.